Hey, what's going on everybody? Bladecifer here, and today I have for you guys another video of Black Clover Mobile. And inside of today's video, guys, we're going to be talking about the best SSR skill pages here that are in the game currently. Now, the way we're going to be doing this is pretty much looking at all the SSR pages here, giving you guys at least a rundown of each one and every last one of them that they do here. And we're going to mainly be looking at them not only just for the character standpoint here, but overall good for pretty much all characters in general here. So if you guys are interested in type of things like this, be sure to sit back, relax, and enjoy the video here. We're getting a lot of support from you guys recently, so I gotta say thank you all for all of that here. And I'm gonna continue pumping out content to at least help out all you guys who very well do need it. All right, so jumping straight into the video here, we have a ton of SSR pages to go after here. I currently only have a little bit of them, which is about at least, I want to say 8 in total. And we're going to be going over every last one of them that is currently in the glossary here. Now, these skill pages, of course, they're going to be themed with the characters, as I was saying. They're going to be the basic ones, somewhat like these here. We're going to be pretty much just talking about them all, but then I'm going to at least wire down to the top 5 that you guys are going to be wanting to get here and pretty much just use overall. So if we go ahead and look at the ones currently in the game without the, of course, the Midnight Sun ones here, we're going to take a look at Mimosas being the first one here. Now, Mimosas actually is pretty decent here, being that she actually gets a lot of things done, but the only issue when it does come down to her is mainly the card for itself is kind of good for the character, mainly just good for the character, but not good in an over amount where it comes down to everyone. So if we go ahead and look at the unique skill here, it says she pretty much grants all allies HP recovery here based on her magic attack, as well as extending buffs here and helping out with the damage resistance, which is absolutely amazing in the long run. But the only issue here is, since it is a unique skill card here, it's only good for herself. So if we go ahead and look at the passive skill that is actually for everyone here, we actually have an elegant beginning. This one, of course, it gives you 20% chance to grant all allies 1 remove debuff upon using a skill 2, which is kind of nice to say the least, but it seems like it's a little bit lackluster. Now, when it comes down to at least a healer, there are better options, especially when it does say to different things that will actually be a little bit more helpful for your healers. So it's one of the few reasons why I say this one's kind of okay-ish, but it's more of a unique skill that's going to be mainly for the character rather than being for anyone else here. Now, if we go ahead and take a look at the next card that we're going to about here, this is going to be the Radies card. Now, Radies card is pretty dang decent here, but he kind of has a little bit of that issue, just like Seasonal Mimosa does have here, where it's more of a card used for the character itself rather than a character, or at least a card used for all characters in general here. So if we go ahead and look at the upgraded skill, which is for at least Radies himself here, it upgrades David here, immediately granting him all allies increased defense level 2 buffs, and then also giving him a nice buff for at least increasing his damage resistance. Now, this is something that's pretty dang nice for himself, especially when he's using his upgraded skill buff here. But when it comes down to other characters, it isn't really the best of things here. Now, when we go ahead and look at the passive skill, which is called Twisted Creed here, you're actually able to get at the start of each turn 15% of your max HP as a barrier for 2 turns. Now, when it comes down to these type of this type of card, it does help out a lot of people, especially when it comes down to at least giving them their barrier here, but it's off of their max HP. So if we think about it with a lot of attackers, most attackers don't have a lot of HP, so you would not use it for those guys. And then, of course, the characters such as like different supporters, there's usually better cards in the at least option center that makes this a little bit feel just that empty void. It's not really ultra bad, but it's also one of those cards that just doesn't really make the cut, and seems like it would just be better to have on Radies himself, knowing that not only is he a defender, but he also benefits off the HP, of course, that he has with the at least the set that you're going to run with him, which is going to have a little bit of defense and HP on it as well, and which will help you filter more of that into his barrier. This is definitely for at least his character alone, rather than being for at least an everyone type of card here. And which is going to lead us into our next card, which is immediately our man Lotus. Now, if we go ahead and look at his card is pretty dang decent. It would be pretty good if like at least you got everything from the upgraded skill type effect as well, because it allows you to extend debuff durations on enemies. It allows you to take down their at least damage resistance, as well as inflicts concentrated attack debuffs, which is very nice for his skill 2. But one of the main issues, even with this card being for the character, although it does do very good with the upgraded skill that it has here, when we look at Lotus, we don't really use a lot of his skill 2. It's normally just his actual ultimate and his skill 1 here that actually makes him very much so useful. So even for the own character here, it's kind of in that mid-range zone that you would normally just use this only if, and this is only if of course, you have to use it as a last second resort here. And this is literally just going to be something that you pretty much just use it if you really want to use Lotus's skill 2. But for the passive skill here, which is Cunning Commander here, it's actually a pretty decent passive, which is giving you at least a 25% chance to inflict a 2% reduced speed debuff on the enemy for 1 turn upon attacking. Now this is pretty decent, especially if you do have a person who is an AoE damager here. There are not too many AoE damagers that are always out here, so of course we do have to take that into account there. But the few that do have this AoE damage could possibly do a 25% chance of inflicting this reduced speed, which makes it pretty dang decent, but overall has a little bit of its downsides. One being that 25% is a very low chance, especially for that 2% reduced speed debuff. And then 2 being that since it is a reduced speed debuff in general, characters like Mars, which have like at least debuff immunity, could possibly look at that passive and immediately null and void it. So it does have a little bit of its options that makes it a little bit invalidated, coming down to at least its worth, to say the least. All right, so looking at least our man Rill here, Rill himself has blooming talent and is probably some of the few best cards in the game here. So Rill himself immediately has an upgrade skill that's called Paint here, in which inflicts a reduced defense level 3 debuff on all on all enemies for 2 turns. Now let's take this into account. With his skill 2, which is already nice to actually use for actually taking down enemies immediately here, you actually get yourself a defense level 3 debuff immediately, 50% chance to then remove 2 buffs from the enemy, as well as for each buff that is removed on the enemy, it will actually inflict 20% increased damage taken debuff on them for 2 turns. Now this is absolutely amazing for Rill, because Rill did need that extra oomph, in which after he lost his taunt back in the beta, of course, or at least his counter back in the beta, of course, they had to give him a little bit something else that could make up for it. Paint is definitely one of the few that makes this absolutely amazing, and seeing that you have his card that can upgrade this further to make him actually really good and really strong here, it does come in handy. But the card doesn't stop there. In fact, even the passive skill Blooming Talent is absolutely amazing to anyone that's actually using it here, because 60% chance of it is able to inflict a 10% reduced defense debuff on a random enemy for 2 turns upon using your special skill. This isn't from a skill 2 or just using your skill 1. No, this is from your special skill, which 90% of us are always using kind of first in many situations. So for characters such as like Lotus or different characters like that need those AoE type debuffs here, this comes in handy, because if we take Lotus for example, who can actually put incapacitate on people while also buff stripping immediately here, you're also able allowing yourself to reduce defense as well by 10%, and it has a very high chance of doing so. This card definitely is one that is high on the tier, or at least high in general for a person to get here, and will definitely be in the top 5 once we get to that selection here. Going into our next SSR card here, we're going to be quick firing some of these guys immediately to at least show you guys the reasoning for these though. But we have at least a Fuegoleon here, in which he has a few interesting little plays with his card that makes it pretty decent, but mainly for himself to an extent. So if we go ahead and look at his skills here, we do see that he has a upgraded skill, helping himself get some more burn as well as some increased pin rate. If we look at his passive skill, which is called Respectable Rival here, he grants himself 12% increased damage dealt when HP is equal to 50% or higher. Now this isn't bad, this isn't specifically for him himself, it's actually a pretty all-around card that makes him pretty decent to say the least here. If he was at least, I want to say, a little bit buffed on the scale for at least how low you would have to get here, it would be way better in my opinion here, because the 50% is amazing to have, and it's 50% or higher, so that 12% is actually nice. But if we could get that 12% to maybe a 15% or something of the sort, this would be an absolute star level card here. Now, this card in general is definitely not bad, so he is a really good choice on some DPSs as well. So truly don't let this write this out of the actual plot for you if you do have this card and you're willing to use it. Going into our next card immediately here, we're checking out Charlotte. Now, this card is fairly interesting, right? Because this card immediately is not only amazing for the character, but also has their actual stats that is pretty dang decent when it comes down to the passives in general for all other characters. For our actual skill here, it's upgrading her main skill, which is Thorn Garden, immediately doing the skill 2, inflicting reduced damage level 3%, or at least level 3 on all enemies for 2 turns. Now, additionally with this as well, you're actually able to inflict 50% chance of a mark on an enemy for 2 turns, in which what marks pretty much does here is if you have this and you end up killing that enemy with the mark on them, it actually allows you for whoever killed them to go again. That's kind of crazy, kind of insane to say the least here. And so you're seeing that you're able to upgrade this as well to get more debuffs for the enemy here. It actually makes this way more valued. Now with the passive skill, of course, which is called Rose's Thorn here, you have that 35% chance to inflict a 10% reduced crit resistance debuff on all enemies here for 2 turns upon attacking. Now this can only be, of course, 1 enemy immediately, but that reduced crit resistance is actually pretty dang nice, especially if there's a person who has really high crit defense here. Being able to actually take that down immediately can actually do you some good, especially seeing that you really want to knock those crits in to deal the most damage possible. The only real problem with this is it is a 35% chance to inflict it for only just a 10% reduced crit resistance, which is where it has its cons, where other cards could be possibly better, but still it's not bad, mainly for her own character, but also not too bad to use on other characters as well. So if you would like to experiment with that, you possibly can. Going into Nozelle's card here, Nozelle's card is actually in that iffy range. If I'm thinking about it right, Nozelle is kind of okayish, right? So if we're going ahead and just taking a look at what he can pretty much do, this character is just interesting to say the least. Like, I don't really think there's a need for this card, to be honest. I don't even think it's really good on anyone, to say the least, to be honest. And I know some people will get mad at me about this, whatevs, I get it, but it's definitely not in the top at all. It's not even near the middle section here when it comes down to it. It reduces magic attack here as well. For every continuous damage an enemy is taking, you're granting yourself increased damage buff here, but just the passive skill also is just not all right, because upon taking damage there's a 20% chance to inflict SP -1 debuff on the attacker. That's a debuff that can easily be cleansed. It's a debuff that's just kind of just not needed to begin with. It won't really mess you up, and no one's using Nozelle to begin with, especially when it comes to his card being on himself. So it's definitely a bad skill card to say the least. If you do have it, just keep at least 1, but I don't think you'll really be using this one too much. All right, going into Jack's card here. Jack's card is one of those other cards that for himself is pretty decent, but the only issue is Jack isn't the best of characters to be using here. As much as the card actually does help him out, which increases his pin, his crit rate, and his speed, including the defense pin rate that he has, it's not good enough. It's not good enough because, one, the character cannot support the card too often. Although the card is actually pretty decent, he can't support the card too much, so it's not gonna help too much to use it. And then along with the passive skill, which is called the Thrill of the Struggle here, the 50% chance to attack after granting a 10% increased damage dealt buff upon using skill 1. It's very narrow. It's very narrow where you can actually do this. A lot of characters don't give themselves what's it called, that increased damage dealt in general from using the skill 1, and it's a 50% chance to attack after doing this, but you have to grant a certain buff on yourself in order to do this here. So it's very narrow. It provides little to no way of actually proccing this passive on anyone. So this is one of the few cards that, I mean, it isn't horrendously bad compared to some regular just like non-character SSR cards, but it is kind of horrible, to be honest, just to say the least. It's kind of bad, but that's just personally what I would think on that one. You guys can take that one with a grain of salt, but we're gonna go ahead and continue moving on with it. Now, looking at William's card. Now, William's card here for himself is absolutely amazing, but for other characters is definitely in the bad zone here. So if we go ahead and look at his upgraded skill, which is called Pulse of the Magic Tree here, he's able to upgrade his attack level to 4 for 2 turns, as well as his speed level 4 to 2 turns as well. And then he's also able to grant himself status element immunity for 1 turn and a 60% chance to grant an ally 30% increased mobility. Now, this is definitely something that is absolutely amazing on himself, because he's known for doing this, especially with his skill 2 quite often. And you're going to be always using his skill 2 in the future, no matter when you have this character. He does so many things that actually make a different unit absolutely cracked, that when you actually use this skill card on himself, you will have a very high major chance of at least winning this without a doubt. So things that you don't have to worry about is at least using this character on his own, at least using this card on his own character. But coming down to the passive skill at the bottom, which is called Captain's Condemnation here, is where things get a little bit iffy. Now, by using this skill 2, you will grant the ally with lowest HP ratio, HP recovery equal to 6% of the max HP, which is actually pretty nice to an extent, but it's actually not as high as you think. Most characters are going to be using their ultimates and then basic attacks, and then the few that are using your skill 2 here, they're not using it 24/7 to a point where you're meant to heal a person off of it, and they don't do enough to actually heal enough on the other characters that are with it. So the passive skill kind of drags this card a little bit lower than most other cards would be. So it's kind of an iffy kind of standpoint with this card in general here, but it's just gonna have to stay like that, especially seeing that that passive skill isn't the best on most characters at all. Now, of course, if you made it this far in the video, be sure to put down in the comment section comment section hashtag skill card here, in which we're going to be doing some nice stuff here, and hopefully I can come out with some more guides for you all very soon. But all right, looking into our next card, which is Lion Spirit Leopold signature card here. For the top skill, it's actually not that bad on Leopold himself here, even though Leopold isn't the most used character / best character at all, but it does do some nice things, increasing the magic attack buff as well, while giving you a 70% chance to burn, 65% chance to burn for Leopold himself. But the main thing that we all like to look at is the passive skill down below. This one's called Lion Spirit as well, in which grants himself increased all attack buff proportionate to current HP. Now this can max out at 15%. And if we think of the different cards like that are like this somewhat, you would mainly be looking at different DPS cards that's somewhat just like some of the best cards in the game there, but you would mainly be looking at this one here. So we have this one, which is all attack at 10%, which can get upgraded pretty dang high. And you have this one as well, which can get upgraded pretty dang high as well. And those two are really, really good to at least have each other. And I think there's an SR book that actually helps out with that type of deal as well that you could possibly use. So it immediately keeps this card higher on at least the spectrum. This card is definitely one of the best cards in the game that you could possibly get for some of your characters here. And it's definitely usable on all characters. It's not only bound to Leopold, thank you for that. And it's actually really, really good to be used on all characters. So definitely check it out if you can get it. Now going at least into Sally's card here. Sally's card is also another card that's actually kind of cracked for everyone that ends up wearing it here. The main reason I put this in the news is because the upgraded skill, which is called Powerful Dose here, increases magic attack level 4, crit rate level 4, extends buff durations, and can lifesteal. That's already amazing for her own self thing here. But when it comes down to the passive skill itself here, you have Insatiable Quest here, in which upon using a skill 2 will grant you a 10% increased all attack buff to the highest ally, or at least the ally with the highest attack for 2 turns. So when you have a character who is meant to just do straight up just all attack in general, and whoever has just the highest attack in general, you're getting this crazy high buff depending if whoever uses a skill 2. So it can even be like Finral. You can use characters that aren't Sally, that in general you use this card skill 2, you will have an amazing passive that will support your entire team. So whoever wears it will absolutely benefit off of it. This card's definitely one of the best cards in the game, at least currently in the game right now, and will definitely be in the top 5 as well. So surely do look after that. All right, so now we're getting down to our last few for at least our actual dedicated cards. Then we're going to go to the seasonal cards immediately and then check out the last few cards here. Now, I don't think we remember going over at least the Yami card here. So before we get into those last few, I do want to go over this card here because I think I skipped it around. But Yami's card is pretty okay-ish. It's not the craziest at all. It's kind of in the middle range here for a little bit, and which helps with the HP recovery immunity, grants you SP buffs and stuff like that for himself, which is already kind of lackluster. But then the passive skill Easygoing Teacher is also a little bit lackluster as well, giving a 20% chance to grant SP +1 upon attacking. Now you guys already know this is kind of in the iffy range, so I mean, if you got it, cool, but it's not really gonna be too helpful, even for Yami himself. So surely do take that with a grain of salt. All right, so going ahead and looking at Asta here, which is probably the one of the number 1 cards currently, and this is mainly because the card itself helps out Asta quite a lot with some attack level 2, as well as increasing his mobility, but alongside of him getting 12% crit damage. That is all I got to say for this card for the most part. If you are a DPS type of character here, this card is absolutely good on any DPSer, on anyone, if you want to actually say it that way. This card, definitely without a doubt, if you can get your hands on it, especially if you got the battle pass, definitely try to get it, especially if you weren't able to pull it. It is way worth it, so surely do look into that. All right, getting into at least our other Yami, which is Red Yami's card, which isn't actually too bad at all. It's actually really nice here because you're able to actually, upon bleed here, you can proc a stun immediately, increase damage dealt, and increase crit damage with this card itself on Yami. But the good part is the passive skill that it comes with, which is the Captain's Dignity. Now the Captain's Dignity here grants 2.5% of increased crit rate at the end of the ally's turn here, stacking up to 5 different times actually, and will absolutely be amazing. Now a lot of us actually got this for free no matter what, because of course Global gave it out for free. Even on Canadian version, I think you actually got the card for free as well. So if you do get this card and you are using some sort of DPSer, heck, even if you're using Red Yami, this card is actually really good. I would suggest definitely putting it on the DPS no matter what, because it's just going to get you very far, especially depending on what DPS you have it on in general. Definitely gotta say this one's absolutely amazing as well. All right, so going along with our next card here immediately, this is going to be the man, myth, the legend himself, in which is Mars. Now Mars's card is actually cracked. His regular just skill card on himself immediately helps out his skill level 1, which you guys are going to be using quite a lot, with a 60% chance to taunt, but also you end up getting an increased defense level 1 buff for 2 turns as well, which is absolutely amazing. But the thing that really makes it his bread and butter is the passive skill called Survival of the Fittest here, granting you 4% fortify upon taking damage, in which can stack up to 4 times. Now this does reset every turn, of course. It's not something that will stay there, which is its only downside, but the fact that it resets every turn and you can stack it up 4 times, which is up to 16% fortify, making sure you don't take that much damage whatsoever, is actually kind of crazy, and definitely is a high list on the top 5. All right, so getting into the unnamed cards here, we're just gonna straight up speed through all of these guys, and I'll straight up tell you right now, this card right here, not good. Don't want to use it. Not really good at all, especially at the start of a turn for removing silence. Not a good card whatsoever. Will not help you whatsoever. Speed running this one as well here with the remove debuffs, or at least a 25% chance to grant yourself a remove debuff here. Absolutely just, it's dog water. And Breath of Water is actually dog water, and it's not really worth trying to get up. And then coming into our another one that is actually not good at all here, and that is Breath of Light. Now, Breath of Light grants continuous damage immunity for 1 turn, and there's a 10% chance to grant continuous damage immunity for 2 turns, but it's just not worth it, you guys. So if you get those 3 cards, try to avoid them at all costs. They are not the best whatsoever in that type of, at least, outlook here. All right, so now that we went over the bad cards immediately here, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other cards, and we're going to start with the Crystal Orb of the Abyss. Now, Crystal Orb of the Abyss here has a 35% chance to grant 4% of max HP as HP recovery at the start of each turn. This is pretty okay-ish here. It's definitely not garbage, like just straight up trash like the other 3 that we mentioned, but it's not good either. Seeing that there's only a 35% chance to grant 4% of max HP as HP recovery is already kind of bad, but the fact that it's only 4% itself as well definitely is kind of bad, seeing that that is actually a low percentage in general that you could possibly be using for your characters. All right, so going ahead and checking out our next card here, let's go ahead and go over the Moonlight Necklace. Now, Moonlight Necklace is actually a really good card for a basic SSR card here, and it actually goes on anyone that you actually want to put it on here. And this is mainly because it grants a 40% increased defense buff for you, as well as a 6% increased HP recovery buff, which is pretty nice to have nonetheless here. So surely don't throw this one out the window if you do have it. Going along with our Breath of Wind one, which is actually one I currently use on my Charmy here. It's pretty as well okay-ish slash mid-ish range here, because you do get yourself a status element immunity for 1 turn at the start of each wave, while also granting yourself 7% max HP as HP recovery upon being afflicted with a status element here. It is very situational, but it definitely does come in handy, so don't throw that one out the way either. All right, so now we're gonna look at least the red one here, which is the Breath of Flame. Breath of Flame is pretty dang decent. You actually get this one, you can regularly summon for it, but you actually get this one from the raid as well, which is the Golem raid. That will help out a decent bit here, because attacks after granting 12% increased damage delta buffs will actually be perfect when you're actually fighting the boss here. So you will get that lovely buff there as long as you're fighting a boss here, and which could really give you that extra oomph of damage that you might be missing. All right, and then we're going to immediately go ahead and look at, I think this is our last card if I'm right here. Except for the book here, which we're actually going to quickly go over the book. This book is probably one of the best non just SSR cards here, and this one gives you max HP by 10%. Definitely want to put that on someone who really needs HP, especially supporters or defenders. Now lastly, we're going to be going over the Breath of Earth here, which isn't the worst out of all the Breath of cards here, but it gives you pretty much a attacks pretty much after granting 12% increased damage dealt. It will end up giving yourself a barrier. Now it's pretty decent to say the least, but it's still very, very situational, and which makes it kind of in the middle ground. All right, so now getting to the point that you guys are all waiting for, which is the top 5 cards that I would definitely suggest you guys to be getting here. These 5 pretty much just work out for everyone. They're absolutely amazing and hard to really much so replace here. Now, I think one of them will be, of course, a non-named card here, so surely do know of this. All right, so coming out in the top 1 here, we're immediately going to look at the Mars cards, giving you that nice fortify here, helping you out a lot when it comes to stacking that nice damage, or at least damage reduction. So surely do invest in this one. If it was up to me, this would definitely be one of them that you would definitely want to try and get immediately. Number 2, I would definitely say that's obtainable no matter what, that we should all have immediately, is the Breath of Darkness. This one goes on any DPS, heck, any character at general here, and this one could absolutely be helpful in all ways, or just ways in this whole game here. So surely don't throw this one away. It's definitely earned its number 2 spot. Number 3 being actually an SSR card I do not have currently, and this is Asa's card immediately here, because for just attackers in general, crit damage is absolutely crazy to have and actually has its places, especially when it comes down to just anything that you very well will need. Number 4, immediately going with this one, we're going to go with at least another supporter, because the attackers have been getting a lot of love with real quick. Let's go ahead and look at the debuff first. This one would be Rill. Now Rill, the only reason I would actually technically get this one for a lot of reasons is not only because it's good for Rill himself, but it's overall good for everyone as well, giving that nice 10% reduced defense here, and it with a really high percent chance of actually activating it. As well, being that it's on a special skill, this actually helps it out a lot more to be higher in the rankings, coming down to which cards are going to the top 5. And then lastly here, we're going to be going ahead and using one from at least the supports here, and this would be our girl Sally's card. Sally's card is absolutely amazing, immediately giving you a 10% chance of increased all attacks to the highest attack ally here for 2 turns, and this is activated on at least a skill 2. Main reasons I did it for this way is because it's just absolutely amazing for a supporter like Sally herself or anyone to use this here, because it does come very much in handy. So surely do take a look at that when you do get the chance here. But some honorable mentions for the top 5 would definitely be Leopold taking at least the 5th place spot. Leopold's absolutely amazing when it does come down to that, so it definitely wasn't on the radar for top 5. Another one that was in the honorable mention spot would definitely be at least Captain Yami, seeing that everyone does have this card as well, and its passive skill is absolutely kind of crazy. This one would definitely take the top 5 spot if Sally definitely was not there, neither was Leopold. But without further ado, you guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button with your forehead and consider subscribing if you are new. Of course, we're going to continue going with our daily uploads. You guys might see this one, like, I think right before we stream, which I think you guys might see this at least around 5:30 maybe. Hopefully me, when he got off of work, kind of scheduled that the right way. But till then, everybody, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and can't wait for the next one, and talk to you guys next time. Peace.